This is a Niche Radio podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or log into www.nicheradio.co.za.
Welcome to SuperDads. I'm your host, James Lech, and we are broadcasting to you on Niche Radio and Worldwide Radio and a bunch of others that are coming up on the spectrum now. And today I'm very fortunate to have Albert Einstein's cousin. Yes, that's right. He is his cousin, and I'll explain to you why he's his cousin. One thing is that he did actually brush his hair for interview. I had a mix-up with the time, and had I caught him at the incorrect time, you would have actually seen more of the relational understanding. But in terms of, how I regard him in terms of his application towards science and being Einstein's cousin, is that he takes science and he wants to make sure that it's simplified. So again, studying the extreme complexities and removing a lot of the other stuff that's unnecessary and observing nature. And in observing nature, one is actually able to visualize and picture, the interrelations and how things fit in. And his name is Gerald Pollack. And he maintains an active laboratory at the University of Washington in Seattle, not Washington, D.C., as I had a mix-up with my time schedule calendar. And, he has an overriding philosophy that science is essentially simple. So one of the things we're going to cover is how his work in scientific activism, where he's challenged the staid dogma with fresh ideas, explain more is a core element of improving a scientific enterprise that has been progressively eroding. So again, we're just going to take away that just because something seems more fancy with bells and whistles and sounds more with these complex words doesn't really mean that it's going to be fully understandable. He also put together a fantastic water conference, which I'm hoping to attend next year. Water conference, and it was first initiated in 2005 and it's run annually ever since. And what's great about it is that it does focus on multidisciplinary aspects where it brings together physics, chemistry, biology of water, and from leading scientists from around the world that share the same passion, understanding of keeping it simple, yet diving into the complexity at the same time. So with science, we have to understand that it is a philosophy, it is an art. And the overriding philosophy of Gerald's laboratory is that, when you see the website with the show note links, you'll see how it's simple. Everyone's so much more relaxed. They're more in tune with nature, where they focus on these foundational principles that are ultimately simple. And the mechanisms, if they appear complicated, and if you find it difficult to understand, then it's probably because you're not in the same type of stream as they are. And, you just need to sort of shake down some foundations and get back to the understanding of things and throw away your old textbooks and focus on this new way of understanding science. So, Jerry, thanks so much for being here with us today. Sorry for the very long introduction, but, reviewing your work in that, it's definitely, my regard is that you're definitely Einstein's cousin.
Well, thank you so much for that kind compliment. I did brush my hair, so the Einsteinian look has, I hope, more or less disappeared. But really happy to be with you, and also happy that you are able to convey so clearly what our basic philosophy is. I think it's an important one because science used to be a search for simplicity. But it's not that way anymore. It seems to be more a search for complexity. And my colleagues often will stand up at the podium and present a really complicated story. And the underlying message is, look how complicated it is and look how smart I am to be able to understand all these complications. So, I guess I'm old-fashioned that way. I prefer the philosophy that we give credit to Occam, Sir William, I think it is, Occam's razor. Look for the simplest explanation, not the most complicated. Oddly, Occam is given credit, but it was really Newton who was responsible for that, because Occam was talking about the search for God, and he said, let's keep the arguments really simple and straightforward. And then some centuries later, Newton picked up on that, and he said, this is really a cool idea, and it applies to science too. Let's keep it simple. So I think maybe it should be called Newton's razor instead of Occam's razor. Remember it next time you're shaving.
Well,
anyway, happy to be with you. Yeah.
It's interesting how you mentioned Gardner, because one of the themes that are building up in this show is that how light is God and God is light. And that's part of what we're also going to discuss in terms of how it's links to water and how light has such a profound effect with water. And, with this whole simplicity thing, I mean, you've been at the exercise for decades. One of your mentors, Gilbert Ling, and I mean, one of your earlier books was Cells, Gels, and the Engines of Life Anew, a unifying approach to cell function, where you took the attempt of taking Ling's, for many people out there, even very educated scientists, reading his work can seem quite, depth and complex for them. But you had the ability to sort of simplify that. And then you even simplified it even further with your book, The Fourth Phase of Water, Beyond Solid, Liquid, and Vapor. And every time and even your presentations online, how you just keep on going simpler and simpler into it the whole time. And I must tell you, it was really inspiring, because the sort of the history of when I was preparing for this interview, on Monday, I had to take my service puppy in to get the snip. And sort of I dedicated, okay, I've got about a good 8 hours here, and let me just focus on prepping for this show, to the show notes and what I'm going to ask you, and studying the material, and get a good day of learning for myself and background and understanding. So I drove a little bit down the road. So this, where I took her, is by the farmlands. So I went to the first wine farm on the side, and it was right next to high voltage power lines. So I'm thinking, nope, that's not going to exactly do the setting I'm looking for. I went into the next one. This next one had a big cell phone tower. I'm thinking also, this is not going to quite do what I'm looking for. Then I went to the next one, a little bit over, and it's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. One's to this, one's to that, and finding the perfect realm. And I pull up over there, and it's a wine farm golf estate. And thankfully, to my surprise, it was empty. I got out the car and I found a big money note by my driver's seat on the ground. So someone left it. So that was really a good piece of luck. And I went to the restaurant of this estate, and thankfully it was still before sunrise. So I got to sit on the balcony, enjoy the sunrise, and contemplate sort of those effects. They even have springbok. I don't know if you've ever seen a springbok. It's one of our national animals. And they were all on the golf course enjoying the sunrise. And then it was getting a bit cold, so I decided to come in, and they have a nice little fireplace, and getting my notes out and having a glass of Shiraz. So this whole combination thing was getting me a lot to think of water and light and nature, and this whole combination. And it's one of those things where all this combination of the right environmental thought settings really helped me develop a lot of new connections and ideas, and it prompted a new study aspect or linkages I'm busy trying now to explore further. But again, it's thanks to your work and this simplifying things, and how your presentations, particularly in the electric universe, series and conferences, how you're just able to take these models and have these predictions. And the more you can see these predictions coming true, then it becomes a reality of the model. And that's sort of being the principles I understand with your research, is that you have an idea, you model the expectations, or sometimes even in the case with the EZ and the water tube, it was one of your students that accidentally came across it, and you helped to pioneer that even further to the water filtration system that you patented recently.
That's what we do. That's what we do for a living. We're interested in discovering nature at its simplest. Maybe you didn't ask me, but maybe for your listeners who are mostly, I think, not familiar with some of the things that we've discovered, maybe I should say a few words about what we discovered about water, because it's really central. It's central to nature. It's central for health. It's central to essentially our existence. So let me just go on for a little bit and talk about that, and hopefully keep it as simple as you suggested that it might be. And so for many years, we've known that water has three phases: solid, ice, liquid, and a vapor. And that's what we learn in middle school or even primary school. Three phases. But the funny thing about three phases, what I'm getting to is a fourth phase of water that we discovered. And the problem with that is even 100 years ago, when scientists were looking at water, there were observations that simply couldn't be explained if you conceive of water as having three phases. And a lot of people began scratching their heads about that. And there was a physical chemist more than 100 years ago, Prana guy, who suggested that water actually has more than three phases. It must have a fourth phase, because that's the only way, a fourth phase, something between a solid and a liquid, is the only way we can explain all the evidence, all of the observations that don't fit the idea of three phases. And a lot of people began thinking that there might be a phase of water where the molecules are actually ordered and not random. So you take a glass of water and you think about the molecules of water inside that glass of water. So we think of them as H2O, and the molecules are all dancing around at a huge number of times per second, and they're randomly disposed. And this other phase that was suggested is a phase where the water is actually ordered. The molecules are all lined up in some way. And of course, you might imagine that that's a controversial viewpoint, because many people and many scientists have staked their careers on building theories based on three phases, even though three phases can't explain a whole lot of things. The number of so-called anomalies that exist, there are something like 60 or 70 or so at last count, that is anomaly stuff that doesn't fit the standard theory. And you mentioned the name Gilbert Ling. And so Gilbert Ling, you might say he was a mentor of mine. We didn't work together. Gilbert, by the way, is 99 years old and still kicking. Bless his heart. I was impressed by what he produced. He's by now written, I think, 7 books, perhaps 6, but I think it's 7 books. And they're all on a similar theme. They all have to do with the water that's inside the cell, that is inside us. And Gilbert's controversial viewpoint is that the water inside our cells is not at all like water in a glass. All the water molecules are lined up in some way. It's like a crystal, or you might say a liquid crystal. And his ideas have not been popular, you can imagine, because many scientists have based their ideas, philosophies, experiments on the concept that water has 3 phases. It doesn't have this organized phase. So the book that you mentioned, The Cells, Gels, and the Engine of Life, really was an attempt to bring Gilbert Ling's ideas to the mainstream. Gilbert has a habit of writing for people whose expertise rivals his own, and the average Joe can't make any sense of it. Well, I got hold of one of his books after I met Gilbert at a conference in Hungary. And there were lots of other people there who had supporting evidence for his theory. And I gave it to some of my students and postdocs to read. And they came back to me unanimously saying, this guy, he's either absolutely right or he's almost right, and whatever he's doing is extremely important, because, you know, if the water molecules in the cell are all lined up in some way, they're obviously going to behave in a way that's completely different from the way everybody expects. And I was impressed by this. And so we decided, or I decided after a while, to write a book to make Ling's ideas clearer. And I guess you might say the book was a mixed success. Some people love it, other people hate it. Some people say, oh, this is merely a reiteration of this crazy guy, Gilbert Ling, and everybody knows he's wrong, so this is worthless. So it kind of split reviews. It does have a nice cover to the book. Anyway, I went a little bit beyond what Gilbert was suggesting in that book, and the idea that came out of it is that the cells really do have this kind of ordered water, and the water undergoes can undergo a transition from the ordered water, where the molecules are lined up, to ordinary water. And this transition, I argued, based on a lot of evidence, is an initiating agent to triggering all kinds of fundamental cell biological processes. In other words, the transition is key to unlocking or initiating many events that occur inside your body and my body. So we were, of course, after publishing that book and getting a lot of blowback and also some accolades, we were really curious to find out more about this kind of unusual phase of water. And I guess we, through luck or whatever, we struck it rich, because we found something that led to a really new and I think fundamental understanding of water, which does have this phase of water where the molecules are ordered. We found that the ordering was not exactly as Gilbert Ling suggested. So let me just tell you about what we found in 2 or 3 or 4 of the most fundamental properties of this kind of water, because it's not trivial. It's not a kind of water that some obscure scientist can find in the laboratory. It's the water that fills your body and my body. So it's central to everything. So the way we found this water initially is we took a gel, and we immersed the gel in water, which contained a whole lot of particles, microspheres, if you will, little tiny spheres. And when we put it in the water, we found that the microspheres didn't want to be anywhere near that gel. They moved away from it rather resolutely, and they moved away, leaving a gap, leaving clear water with no particles. We call it exclusion zone for obvious reasons. And this, of course, intrigued us no end, because why the distance we're talking about is fractions of a millimeter, and by molecular standards is practically infinity. So it's a huge zone where these microspheres don't want to go. And later we found that a lot of things don't want to go. Just almost not everything, almost everything is excluded from this zone. So we did a whole bunch of studies, and we found a few properties that are I think a key. Besides the exclusion, we found first of all that this region, this exclusion zone region, contained water that was lined up in a particular way, and the way I think is not the way Gilbert Ling suggested, where the water molecules were actually lined up. It's actually a chemical transition that occurs to something we call it fourth phase water. H3O2 is the chemical formula, and it's a kind of hexagonal lattice that builds in sheets. So it starts at the gel or polymer or whatever surface. It has to be a hydrophilic surface, that is a water-loving surface, meaning that, if you got the surface sitting horizontally and you put a droplet of water on it, the water will spread out instead of beating up as it would in, say, a Teflon or a hydrophobic substance. So what happens is that when the water meets this interface, meets this material, the ordinary water undergoes a conversion, and it converts to this fourth phase hexagonal sheet-like structure. And these sheets build from the surface. They build out, and they can build up to millions of sheets, not just 1 or 2. This is a huge event. And typically, this water is not neutral anymore. It has a negative charge. And the region beyond this fourth phase water it has equal positive charge. So the way it occurs is that the water molecules somehow get split into H plus and OH minus. And the OH minuses gather together at the interface and build this fourth phase water. And the H plus, the protons, are excluded and they sit outside. So you have a battery-like effect in which the easy water or fourth phase water, I use those terms interchangeably, they usually bear a negative charge, and the water beyond bears positive charge. So it's like a battery. And we found that you can actually extract electrical energy from this battery. And so last point, I guess, with regard to this is, you can't get something for nothing. If you can get energy, like electrical energy and order out of chaos, you need to have energy to do that. It's kind of like, it's like your office or your room or your kids' rooms. It's easy to get messed up. And it requires essentially no energy to do that. You just leave things around. But if you want to straighten it up, it requires time and energy. So energy to create order, energy to create this separation of charge, is like a battery, like you have to plug in your cell phone battery. And so where does the energy come from? Well, this really plagued us, this question, for several years, because we couldn't figure out where the energy came from. You can't plug it into the mains and get 120 or 220 volts or whatever you've got. And so we couldn't figure it out. We were scratching our heads. And one day after we knew the answer to this, I was giving a class. And I asked the students in the class, I said, well, where do you think the energy comes from? And of course, a lot of blank faces. But one guy raises his hand and says, rather tentatively, light. And he had the right answer. It took us years, but it took him a few seconds. And we quickly recruited him to work in our laboratory. It turned out to be wonderful. So it turns out that the energy comes from light. It's a really simple source. And you mentioned light early on. And so we did some experiments we had done some experiments before the student popped up. The experiment started with actually a chance observation by yet another student. He was sitting at the bench and had a little chamber where he was studying exclusion zones, fourth phase water. And there was a gooseneck lamp sitting right next to him. So he took the gooseneck lamp and he shined it on the chamber. And he's looking at a microscope and he sees that the exclusion zone is expanding enormously when he put the light on it. And then he pulled the light away and it returned to its original. So as I like to say, it doesn't take a rocket scientist or even an Einstein to figure out that if you add light and light is building, that maybe the energy comes from the photons in the light. And we confirmed that. We confirmed that it wasn't just any light. We measured many wavelengths of light, starting from the short wave ultraviolet through the visible range of the spectrum to the infrared. And we found that it was the infrared energy that was the most powerful, most effective by far in building this easy water. And we even identified the optimum wavelength. It's 3 micrometers. Excuse me. Oh, stifling a sneeze. Okay. And so we now we know right now that building this water requires infrared energy. And so a question that always rises is, well, yeah, but where? So it sounds pretty obscure. Where do you find infrared energy? So we all know if you look into the electric oven and you see the coils glowing bright orange, it's warm, and we all say, well, it's generating heat and infrared energy. It's kind of vaguely couched in those terms. So we usually associate heat with infrared energy, or infrared energy with heat, and there's merit to that. But what people don't understand is that everything generates infrared energy. So in the studio where you are, if we turned off all the lights and it was totally dark so that the video camera couldn't get any image at all, if we took out an infrared camera instead of an ordinary video camera that's sensitive to visible light, we get a beautiful image of you and the chain around your neck and your shirt and et cetera, in the background. And the reason is that everything is generating infrared energy. And so a sensor that picks up the infrared energy can detect all of that, even if there's no visible light present. So infrared is all around us. It's always there, and it's free for the taking. It costs nothing because, I mean, it's literally free energy. We learn in our chemistry books about so-called free energy. The concept is fairly common, although maybe for some not so easy to understand, but this is literally free. You don't have to pay anything for it. It's there all the time, which in turn means that this water is there all the time. So whenever you have the right kind of hydrophilic surface and water, you're going to have easy water at the interface between the two with all of those wonderful properties. And as I said earlier, that's the stuff that fills your body. So I'm sorry, I've been going on and giving a speech. This is meant to be more of a discussion than a speech. So please chime in.
Well, the speech is important because it helps give our audience members a bit of the more understanding. I'm pretty sure they're still scratching their heads, but I guess, in a way, where I was trying to rationalize for them is in practical terms. So what the EZ does, so we've got electrons in the body and we have protons and sort of how they work together. So the EZ zone is kind of the institution of marriage. It's what brings them together. So if you're going from, like you said, from a liquid to a solid or to ice, the EZ is sort of that formal process, a contract where you're going to have now a marriage between the two, and they're going to agree to have their vows and they're going to follow a certain type of structure. Am I pretty correct in that type of analogy?
Well, yes, mostly, except that with the electrons and protons, it's actually a vehicle for separation of the electrons and protons, not actually exactly bringing them together. Because what happens is when you have the infrared light and the right conditions, the water meeting the surface. What happens, the process of building this water is actually a process of separating negative and positive charge. The negative and positive charges are right in the water molecule to begin with. But what the light does is it breaks up the water molecule into the negative and the positive. And so the process is one of separation, maybe rather than marriage.
Yeah, I think what I was meant to say is in terms of marriage, that you have a husband and wife and each their own, but there's a type of the vows or the contractual agreement of who is responsible for their own part in this unification. Otherwise, you just have chaos. If there wasn't an agreement of understanding between them, you wouldn't have this uniform exclusion zone developing and maintaining itself.
Fair enough. That makes sense. Okay, I'm with you. Okay. Sure.
So with all these red lights, it does have an effect on the brain where one actually is more prone to, well, it puts one to sleep and releases the growth hormone. So hence my articulation isn't as proficient as it was when I was doing these notes at sunrise in the morning.
It's just fine. You're doing great.
So in terms of also with this whole relation of light, on one of the equations, I know you said they don't add up, but building on from Albert Einstein, so his equation of E equals mc squared. And, we always taught to read it from left to right. But when it comes to the explanation of biology, we actually need to read it from right to left. Of light squared times mass or structure gives us energy. And, all of us are led to believe in industry and that, for our body's health, it's all about diet and exercise. Where when we look at Einstein's equations, the complete opposite. And in one of your presentations, you actually also gave the explanation that E, or energy, equals H2O. And when we look inside the mitochondria, water is the first or the primary fuel source, and light is the secondary fuel source. Would you correlate with that to be correct?
Well, yeah. I see. I think there are a lot of issues with regard to mitochondria. So as the putative side of ATP synthesis, the first issue is whether our energy really comes from ATP hydrolysis. So book will tell you that ATP builds and that's the coin of the realm, the source of energy. There's a high energy bond, but again, from Gilbert Ling, if you read his stuff, you'll find that this simplistic idea has been challenged. It was challenged very early on by physical chemists, and Gilbert said these physical chemists had a really good point, and nobody ever challenged that. And so first question, when you say mitochondria, first question is the ATP that's produced. Is this really the source of energy for the cell? And Gilbert argues, no, it's not. And there has been very little comment on that. Gilbert argues, and it makes sense to me also, that it's in ATP, this phosphate has a large cluster of negative charge. And this cluster of negative charge is a site for what he calls structured water buildup, and we would say easy water buildup. And he might be right. This question requires a lot of energy, a lot of work. And then the next question about mitochondria is what really goes on, and a possibility. If you look at the structure of the mitochondria, it's got lots of internal membranes, and these internal membranes are surfaces, presumably hydrophilic surfaces, which could naturally build easy water. So you have a mitochondrion with all of these membranes, and a possibility is to envision the mitochondrion as actually a site for buildup of easy water with its negative charge, and the cell can't function without this kind of easy water, because the cell is filled with easy water. It's the natural milieu of the cell. And this water surrounds every protein. We think of protein folding as the vehicle for action of particular cells, but it's not just the protein, it's the protein surrounded by the easy water, which is negatively charged. And, I'll get to the implications of that in a moment, but it might be that the mitochondrion is actually a source of buildup of negatively charged easy water for the rest of the cell. And if so, then we might think of a kind of alternative possibility for storage of energy in the cell, and that is what we talked about a few moments ago, the separation of charge. As I mentioned, it's like a battery, because easy is negatively charged, and the region beyond that is positively charged. So you can imagine a cell with a lot of negative charge because of the easy water that's in it. And this is potential energy. That's energy that can be expended. And so the question arises, to what extent does this energy, to what extent is that the energy that the cell uses? And I think it may be actually quite a lot. And this is an area that remains to be explored, because everybody wants to know what's the fuel for doing all the work that we do. And for 70 or 80 years, everybody thought of as ATP, and it might be true, but it might not be true. It's possible that, in fact, that we're a lot of batteries inside, and the batteries are actually supplying the energy, and they're recharged from the sun. This is not so different from what plants do, right? So, plants photosynthesize. So you have light coming in, the light is absorbed. And by the way, step one in the long and complicated process of photosynthesis, step one is the splitting of water into H plus and OH minus, just essentially the same as what I've been talking about, and then many other steps that are mostly not so well understood. But it's light that's responsible. So the light comes in, and the light eventually supplies the energy for metabolism, bending, growth, essentially everything that the plant does. So it wouldn't be so surprised if Mother Nature, in her wisdom, exploited the same principles that she developed so beautifully for green plants and some bacteria, and use this in animals. Why not? If you were Mother Nature, would you abandon so successful a phenomenon, or would you sort of keep it in reserve or even use it actively? So this is a different viewpoint. Your initial question was, what about the mitochondria? And so we obviously don't have all the answers about mitochondria, and what I'm telling you is a speculation. So this is something that really does need to be studied. But I think it's possible that we may take advantage of the same principles that plants and many unicellular organisms use. Again, that would lead to some simplicity. But right now, if you read a biochemistry book and try to understand all the processes, it's hugely complicated. And so for me, there's always an attempt to make things simple.
I agree. And the thing is, that's part of the reason why I'm not a huge fan of biochemistry, not the idea of biochemistry, sort of the way it's explained, because the textbooks every year just get thicker and thicker. And
yes.
It's not about actually understanding how something works. It's about describing stories and not properly understanding them. So that's why they just get longer and longer. Yeah. And that's why I've gravitated more to using physics and understanding, because it's focused more on this. Let's go back down to the basics of electrons, protons, and photons.
Yes.
And, even within the cells in the body, I mean, our own cells will produce infrared light, like we talked about earlier. It produces extremely low frequency UV light. And the importance with the water is that it's, again, I guess with quantum computing, is that the water that comes out of our tap is not the same as the water that comes out of our mitochondria within our body and our cells. And how it goes, how the water is changed, and each mechanism where it's changed or reformed, and it enables programming from light. And then, the thing of, like you said, it doesn't make sense how ATP is just about energy. ATP is about so much more than that. It enables, it's like sort of like the flight controller of the system. It's designating and controlling all these other planes and fly throughout the world, and making sure there's no collisions, and making sure there's understanding for this development. And that's why there's more also research into this whole thing of plasma, not blood plasma, but plasma of the universe. So it's quite fascinating, interesting how that whole works. But, part of it coming back into water, and sort of what this show goes on about, and sort of my background is how this impact from non-native EMF. So native EMF is what we get from nature. It's what helps us build the easy and function. But with these non-native EMFs, and that comes from the low magnetic fields, the visible spectrum of light, and in the high frequencies of wireless, is that the impact it's starting to have on the cells is that it's actually changing it from a hydrophilic to a hydrophobic properties. So even though people are drinking water, and we look at the blood panels, they are still dehydrated. Then the cell members actually become hydrophobic, so they're pushing against the water, and then the proteins aren't able to properly fold and unfold it at the same time. I don't know if you sort of came across that with your work as well.
Well, yeah. So you brought up a whole lot of different issues there. The first, or one of them, is hydration. What really is hydration? We need to remain hydrated, otherwise we don't function. And so what is hydration? Well, we think of hydration as filling the cell with enough water, but that water we found is essentially EZ water, or fourth phase water. And so so getting hydrated is step one is drinking water, because you need to have the raw material to build it. But there's a step two, and that step two is converting that water into EZ water, which is what fills our body. And only when our cells are full of EZ water are we properly hydrated. So if you've played a few matches of tennis and you're dead to the world, can't function anymore, what you do is, I don't know if you do it, but sit down, have a few swigs of water, or more than a few swigs, maybe a liter or so of water, 2 liters, and then you get rehydrated, and then you can function. But there are a couple of things about that. First, it's not so simple, because many kinds of water that you drink, including from the tap, get peed out, and so you don't actually absorb a whole lot of water. Other waters get absorbed better, and the question is, which ones are better at building the cellular hydration that we need? And it's not so clear. Scientists have begun studying this, but we don't know for sure. It seems, and maybe this deviates slightly from your question. You mentioned a few things about EMFs and such, and but let me just make a couple of points. First is that, the cell, as I mentioned, the cell is full of EZ water, and EZ water is gel-like. It's like it has the consistency of raw egg white. It's in between a liquid and a solid. It's not really a liquid. And if you think about it, if you cut yourself, you're basically cutting a whole bunch of cells. Of course, you bleed because you cut blood vessels, but you also cut cells. And if you were made of pure water, like water in a glass, all this water would leak out because you've cut the membranes of these cells and ought to leak. But it doesn't. And why doesn't it? Well, because the water that's inside the cells is not a liquid. It's a liquid crystal, or EZ water, or gel-like water. And if you cut a gel, the water doesn't just leak out, it stays within the gel. So that's the water we're talking about. We're talking about gel-like water that fills cells. And so what our body needs to do is to take the water that we drink and convert it into this kind of gel-like water. As I mentioned, this requires light. You can also do it with electricity. If you add negative charge to the water, the EZ water is negatively charged, the water does convert to EZ water. So this actually brings to light some of the things that you can do to bolster your health. And so what are these things? Well, so our hypothesis is that cells can't function properly without a sufficient amount of EZ water. We're born with it. We're born with cells that are full of EZ water. We're perfectly healthy, and the amount of water that we have declines with age. When your hair has turned the color of mine, I'm probably 65% water, and when a kid is born, the kid might be 80% water. So we gradually become dehydrated. And as we become dehydrated, we function more poorly, right? And so I'm no longer capable of playing 2 matches of tennis, and so what we want to do is, in order to maintain health and maintain function, is to build up this EZ water and restore it to its original. See, every protein inside the cell, when the protein folds to bring action, that is, in a muscle cell, the muscle proteins would fold in a certain way and your muscle contracts. In a nerve cell, the proteins fold in a certain way to bring forth information transfer. In a secretory cell, the proteins fold in such a way as to secrete substances. And it's all done by the proteins, but you see, the proteins are not sitting in a vacuum. They're sitting with EZ water. around them. That's the natural environment. And so a protein inside your body will fold naturally if it's got the easy water around it, but it doesn't have enough easy water. It's in a strange environment, and it can't do anymore what it's supposed to do. So it misfolds, and your muscle is not contracting, or your nerves are transmitting nonsense instead of pure signals, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to build up the easy water, and there are some really straightforward ways to do this and to guarantee your health. I'll list 3 or 4 in a moment, but I just want to get back to EMF, because you measured EMFs, and there's a lot that is unknown about the effects of EMFs, and there's a lot that's known that many people don't know about it because the information is not so widely disseminated. The best of all, as an interview by, I'm not sure if it comes your way, but Dr. Mercola, Mercola.
Yes.
So he does a lot of interviews related to health, and in the US anyway, at least, he's very popular. And he interviews a guy whose name is Dietrich Klinghardt. And Dietrich is actually, well, you know his name is, yeah, he's actually a friend of mine, and he practices, also my doctor, and he practices here in Seattle. A really gifted guy who can do amazing things to keep people healthy or to reverse pathologies. And he was actually the mentor of Mercola. And so the interview was about EMFs and the result. And it's easy if you search under Mercola Klinghardt EMFs or something, you'll find it very, very easily. It's an hour-long talk, and it's totally captivating, as Dietrich usually is. And he talks about the patients, and he sees patients with terrible neurological diseases, and he's capable of reversing them. And one of the things that stuck out in his interview is that he says to the patient, the first time he sees the patient, he says, what about the Wi-Fi inside your home? And usually someone would say, well, yeah, of course I have Wi-Fi, like everybody else. So he tells them, he said, well, a really important thing to do is to turn off the Wi-Fi at night. At night is the critical time. It's the time when your brain is processing, it's repairing itself, it's coming back up to par for action the next day. So he said, next time they come back, he said, the first question he asks them is, what have you done about Wi-Fi? And he said, some of them say, well, yeah, I followed your advice. I have a timer, or I unplug it at night. He says, typically those patients are doing somewhat better. And the ones who said, well, I haven't gotten around to it yet, he says, well, maybe you better find another doctor. Because according to his clinical experience, and there's nothing to do with theoretical experience, nothing to do with the effects on cells, of which there's really a lot of information. This is his own clinical observations, is that Wi-Fi is destroying us. So I must admit, I've got Wi-Fi in my home, but I actually now have a timer, and it gets turned off at night. I don't know if I'm doing better, but I'm doing what Dietrich and others have suggested. And it's a bit worrisome now because the new 5G systems that are about to come in are much more powerful, and it's really hard to know what to expect. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because you mentioned EMFs, and there's a lot that is not known about EMFs. And as I said, there's a lot that's known, but we don't pay much attention to it because it's buried in obscure journals, and those who profit from these kinds of devices and such are, they're not eager for you to know about all of this information. Okay, so that's my speech about Mercola-Klinghardt, but I just want to get back to the easy water that's in your cell, which is absolutely critical for function. And let me make one more digression, if I may. because a lot of things come up as we talk. You know, a lot of scientists for 60 or 70 years have been measuring the electrical potentials of cells. And this was in fact made possible by the same Gilbert Ling we're talking about, who invented the so-called glass microelectrode. It's a very fine tipped electrode that you can stick into a cell and measure the electrical potential between the inside and the outside. And it has to be fine, otherwise, you know, you're going to simply destroy the cell. As someone argued, when you stick an electrode into a cell, it's kind of like sticking a telephone pole up your rear end and expecting you to behave normally. So it's got to be. So he invented this, and people have made all kinds of measurements, and everybody knows that the inside of the cell is negatively charged compared to the outside by typically 50 to 100 millivolts. And the question is, well, why is this so? So the theory that we've all learned to accept and believe, which I must admit, when I was a graduate student taking a physiology course with the medical students, I scratched my head for days trying to figure out how this works. But anyway, it's said to work with some stuff that's embedded in the membranes, some kind of pumps and channels that control the flow of positive and negative ions. And so if you pump out some of the positive ions that are inside the cell, then the cell remains negative. And this is the accepted view. Gilbert Ling challenged that in some of his writings. He said, there's not enough energy to power these pumps. And he demonstrated it. And nobody's ever challenged that demonstration, but the people have just ignored it. And I think it's wrong, as Gilbert Ling thinks it's wrong, because there's a very simple explanation for it, and that is the water inside the cell is negatively charged, easy water. So naturally, if you stick an electrode in, you'll get negative electrical potential. It's really simple. And that explains also why if you take a gel instead of a cell, you know, the inside of the cell is just like a gel, but the gel has no membrane. So if the site of action that creates this negative charge inside the cell is the membrane, then you wouldn't expect the gel to be have a negative electric potential. But it has, very similar to the cell. You can stick the same electrode in the gel or in the cell, and you get the same negative electrical potential. So the cell has a membrane, the gel has no membrane. So it really becomes cumbersome to say, if you say that in the cell this negative charge is caused by the membrane, then, you know, well, how come the gel has the same negative charge without a membrane? So that was my digression. I keep digressing, but what I really want to get to is, I think a central point in this is how do you maintain health? How do you maintain health of the cell, which is really your health? And we argue that maintaining hydration or maintaining easy water is critical because every protein is surrounded by easy water. It's a natural environment. So if you don't have enough, if you're not functioning up to par, whether it's your brain or your muscle or your whatever, kidneys, you need to build up this water. And so there are half dozen or so different easy ways to do it. One is drinking a lot of water. Okay. And if you drink the right kind of water, although nobody knows exactly which is the best, it's going to help to build easy water because it's the raw material. Another way is to expose yourself to light, right? Light builds easy water. And so especially infrared light. So if maybe you've had the experience of going into a sauna and you go in for 20 minutes, you feel miserable, tired, achy, and you come out feeling like $1 million. How come? So I mean, most of us think, well, obviously it's a psychological kind of thing, and it might be, but it may also be physical because this heat in the sauna basically is generating infrared energy, and infrared energy is what you need to build easy water. So when you receive this energy, the energy is absorbed by the body directly, and it helps to convert the water into easy water. And this is a way of building up your easy content. So, If, for example, if your brain is deficient in this water and your head is receiving this infrared energy, it's going to build easy water and you feel better. Your headache is gone, or you feel more alert, lively. So that's one way. Walking out in the sun is helpful too. Lying on the grass, we're walking on the grass barefoot, connecting yourself to the earth is another, because the earth has a net negative charge. And so what you're doing by connecting yourself to the earth is you're connecting yourself to a vast sea of negative charge. And this negative charge will seep into your body, build easy water, and make you better again. Another way is to do green juicing. You're familiar with that?
Very familiar, yes, yeah.
Yeah, you take a plant and you squeeze out the juice or the water and drink it. And why is this useful? Well, because what you're drinking is the water from the inside of the plant cell. This water is filled with EZ, just like our cells. And these are fresh, new growth of plants. And so what you're drinking is you're drinking directly the kind of water that you need to replace what's missing. So it's better than drinking just water, because you're actually drinking easy water. These are simple approaches to gaining health, and a lot of people know about these approaches. And what I'm trying to convey is maybe understanding why they work. And I think it all boils down to creating easy water, which is necessary for function. The other is there have been many substances that through the ages people have known are good for health. Example is turmeric. So a lot of people will eat turmeric starting from Ayurvedic times, will eat turmeric because it can cure so many things. And another one is coconut oil or coconut water, et cetera, et cetera. We tried a half dozen of these substances, and our hypothesis was the reason that they have such profound and holistic effects on health is that they build easy water. And wherever you need easy water, if you take these substances, it will help to build the easy water. And we tested that. We have a paper that we produced, which is just about to be published, demonstrating that a half dozen of these agents that we tested, all of them build easy water. See, and so I think, based on the evidence that we have, is that very simple explanation for why these are so broadly effective is they build easy water. So it's one mechanism, one simple mechanism that can operate everywhere in our body instead of a dozen different mechanisms, and that leads to simplicity. So I've listed half dozen, I think, different agents, very simple ones that are known to be good for your health. And I think the reason they're good for your health is because they build the easy water that's necessary for proper health. So that was a long answer to a short question.
No, I mean, well, the thing is, what's also important is science, that one can never be static. One always has to be adaptive to the environments and changes. And you mentioned earlier about the whole thing with 5G, and there's the different source of non-native EMF. So even though you have your Wi-Fi and a timer, assume your friend Klinkard also said it's good to have a kill switch in your bedroom so that you don't have a magnetic field surrounding your space when you're sleeping at night. But some other interesting things, like you mentioned about green juicing. So one thing that's become also very effective now is the consumption of seaweed or seaweed juice. So I would do a thing of going to the ocean, harvesting seaweed, and I'll put it in a blender and make will be my green shot of seaweed. And, apart from, again, building up the easy, it also helps deal with the acidification issue. So that's why kelp or seaweed that works so well in protecting coral in the ocean, and their mechanism. Another thing that also become quite more popular is that because in the mitochondria, the water produced out of it is deuterium depleted water, so that's more effective for the programming from light. there's also a thing of there's different sources of the world where deep underground water and water that's been processed through calcium carbonate and very high magnetic fields from, say, volcanic activity or plate tectonics, an immense amount of pressures, is that the water naturally has low deuterium levels. Now, as our body naturally depletes deuterium on our skin with the sun, and produces UVC for it. But this deuterium sort of acts like chewing gum on the bottom of our shoe. It sort of slows down the ATP phase cog. And ideally, we want it to be spinning faster. And the faster it can, the more deuterium depleted water we have. So, a better EZ zone. So I sort of wanted to cover, get your opinion on this whole thing of deuterium depleted water and how it's having quite also profound effect in clinical medicine, in being effective on inoperable brain tumors, a number of these other different diseases, where it's helping it creates a more efficient process of consuming this external water that's been modified by nature, or in a lab it's even more depleted, and how it's having this, again, this better, easy function within the body.
I wish I could comment on that directly, but I can't. Because I don't understand the mechanism. I've heard the same as you've heard, that deuterium depleted water is good for health. I've seen various studies that seem to indicate it. I'm not sure why. We did study deuterium to see about how deuterium D2O builds easy water, and it does. Not quite as large an amount of easy water as comparing D2O and H2O. So it isn't really clear to me why, but you also get to the point you're implying about which waters are the best ones to drink for health. And as I said, I've heard, same as you've heard, that deuterium depleted water seems to be generally good for health. But there are other waters that are good for health too. And I don't think anybody has done a properly controlled trial comparing these different kinds of waters to see what they do for health. This would be, if done, a really major endeavor. And I get phone calls, emails all the time. Hey, doc, which water should I drink? Thank you very much. The answer is, I don't know. I don't know the answer because it hasn't been done. From a theoretical point of view, for me it makes sense that if you drink water that's rich in EZ water, should be good for health, because it's like the green juicing. You're supplying yourself with the ingredient that you need for proper health. But it still is not so clear. That's a theoretical point of view, and of course, I'd like to suggest that EZ is central to all of that, and the theoretical points of view make sense. But really, what we need is clinical studies to test. And I've proposed to the U.S. National Institutes of Health to carry out such studies. They require a lot of money because they require really extensive numbers of experiments, and you need the personnel and supplies and such to do it. And you really need to compare half dozen or a dozen different types of waters that are out there, and follow them over a course of time to people who are ill, who are drinking the various kinds of waters, which ones do better than the others. I mean, that's the acid test, is to do clinical trials on these. It's also necessary to complement those, to do studies on cells and take sick cells and expose them to different waters and see which ones do better. So until that's done, it's really hard to say which water is good for health. We have a tendency, or I have a tendency, to look toward the waters that have EZ content, high EZ content, as best for health. Sometimes you were talking about primary waters, but there's been a lot of studies, or some studies on waters that are spring waters of various sorts, and many of them are really rich in easy water. And a lot of people know that many of these spring waters have been used for centuries for healing. There's one that's fairly local. It's in the next state, the state of Idaho, one that's been used by Native Americans for eons for healing. And we began looking at this. A friend of mine is starting to get involved, and it tastes really good, and it's said to be good for health. And I think it may be good for health because of the easy content. There's another one by a friend of mine who called me many years ago and said, "Hey, I got this interesting water, and it seems to reverse irreversible kidney pathology." So I said, "Well, I don't believe you." Actually, I did believe him. So he sent me hospital records, and they showed, drinking this water for 30 days transitioned in this particular patient irreversible kidney pathology to no kidney pathology. And by the time he made a presentation at our conference, he had a whole bunch of patients who underwent the same treatment, just drinking his water with the same result. And a colleague of mine went to try to go into business with him, and that didn't work out. But he telephoned me and he told me he interviewed every one of the patients, and he said, it's absolutely true. It can do that. And so this is another example of another kind of water that seems to be really good for health.
So
and the problem
what was unique about that water?
Well, what was unique is that he sent us a sample of the water, and it sat on my desk for 3 months before we had time to check it. And we checked to see easy content, and it had a lot of easy in it. And so our hypothesis is that the reason it's so good is it's full of easy water. There's no guarantee that that's the correct interpretation, but it's the hypothesis that we're working on, that the waters that contain easy are the ones that are going to be good for your health. There's also so-called alkaline water, high pH water, where the water comes in and it passes through two electrodes, negative and positive. And the water that comes past the negative electrode has high pH. And we measured it also has net negative charge, which you might or might not expect. And actually, I thought that this water might contain easy water. We did some tests. We couldn't establish it, but I'm still not sure because of some technical issues. But the main point is that there are many kinds of waters out there, and many of them are touted as really good for health. But the way to find out for sure is to have some sort of central clearinghouse in which all these waters are tested. And to do that requires a rather Herculean effort that should be done by someone who's not financially tied to any of these companies that market the water. One is always suspicious when a company says, "Oh yeah, we've done the test and this is the best water since the invention of the wheel." It might be, but it might not be. So I mean, bottom line is that water is so critically important for health, and it's important in a way that I think is becoming easier to understand. I might mention, by the way, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about is in the more recent book that I wrote. It's called The Fourth Phase of Water. If any of your listeners are interested, it's kind of a challenge to talk about this stuff without diagrams, pictures, cartoons, and such. And that's one way for anybody who's interested to check this out.
No, definitely. I mean, and I think what's also, go back to some of the things you mentioned, is that people, particularly more educated, become a sort of our crutch, because we want to find this one magic bullet to make all our problems go away. And, when you say to do these clinical trials or tests, a lot of them, they miss certain testing protocols, or they don't mix the right things, or they don't take a bigger picture into account, is that, the body and the effects and nature, it's all non-linear. And to have one little, pill or something to fix it all is never going to be the equation. I mean, that's why I'm having doctors, more and more of them approaching me to design treatment protocols for them and their patients, because it's about having a combination of things to get these results. So even the whole, these tests with the deuterium depleted water, is that it's not just the water itself. There's a number of other things you need to do that again sustains and builds this easy effect within the body. So the deuterium is one aspect of it. Like you mentioned earlier, turmeric, or even having seafood or with a high DHA content, within the omega-3s. Again, that also helps accelerate the person's recovery even more. You mentioned even earlier the whole thing with a sauna. So I myself, last year I got an infrared sauna, and again, the original marketing sounds great, but when you actually dive into it more and you understand more the physics, you see, okay, the original base design, what they're marketing is actually, a con in some ways, maybe 60% right, but it's not all there. So I had to do some modifications to it. So one of the things I did was I put a grounding mat in there, connected outside, so I get more negative charges. Also installed some UVA black lights in there. And that combination, so with the infrared and the UVA, also builds more melatonin within the body. And all these different combination of things, again, it builds more and more the easy within the body. Even to the effect where I found difference where the spring water I'd get, I would put it in a copper pot on the ground outside for a number of hours, so it can build up some more charge from there. And what was interesting, because the original idea I got from that was, it was said to, in the United States, to do it overnight, because that's where you're going to have the highest amount of net negative charge from the earth and magnetic flux. And then I found sometimes by accident I would leave it during the daytime, and I found there was sort of a difference of the effect I was getting from the water, from it being charged overnight in the copper pot or it being charged during the day, particularly in the afternoon. And then I saw one of your other presentations where you showed the highest densification of net negative charge for Africa and Europe is actually in our afternoon time. And in the United States, in North America, it's in the evenings around after 8 p.m. So it's quite interesting to see those correlations and how for each environment, it's a different non-linear relationship that needs to be understood in order to get this better effect for health that you're describing.
Well, yeah, totally. I think, in general, light and electricity, what you're talking about, and magnetism too, they've been pretty much sidelined, ignored in mainstream approaches to health and medicine. More and more people are coming to realize how critically important they are. I think, I'm not sure about South Africa, but in the US, more and more people are turning to a so-called alternative medicine, where the people are trying to get at what's beneath, what's underneath, what's responsible for everything that we see. The more conventional approaches don't really pay attention to these phenomena that have in fact been known for centuries to be critically important. We tend to be a bit arrogant. We think that in this century we're so much smarter than all the people from previous centuries, but the more I learn about ancient cultures, the more impressed I am with how insightful they've been. All light is so critically important, and electricity is, we're basically a bunch of electrons and protons. It reminds me of what maybe you've heard this about this fellow prominent British guy who said he finally figured out what the universe is made of, and it turns out to be really simple. It's protons, electrons, neutrons, and morons. So I like that one. It's I think most of us tend to be in the moron category, because there's so much that we don't know. Which brings me to one point that's slightly divergent from the main topic, but I think important, is we have an institute that we put together. It's called the Institute for Venture Science, ivscience.org. And this organization addresses what we've been kind of tangentially alluding to in our conversation, that there's a lot of science out there, but a lot of the science ignores some of the most fundamental and basic concepts and ideas. There's a kind of inertia that the mainstream has to keep forging ahead. So our institute is designed to fund ideas, revolutionary ideas that challenge conventional thinking. And so why do we need something like that? Well, if you ask yourself how many scientific revolutions have occurred during, say, the past 30 years or 40 years, and the first response of everybody is, oh yeah, well, the iPhone, but that's actually technology. This is not fundamental science. I'm talking about science at the most fundamental level. Like some examples would be like the splitting of the atom, or the uncovering of the genetic code. And these are like 60, 70 years ago. So ask yourself, how many scientific revolutions, realized scientific revolutions that have affected everyone's life, how many can you name that have occurred in the past, say, 30 years or so? And most people, scientists, non-scientists, draw a blank. Let's see, fundamental. Sometimes you can name one or two, but ask yourself, how much have they really impacted the thinking of the world? There haven't been too many. And the question is, how come? Because the amount of money that's being put into science these days is astronomically higher than what was put into science 100 years ago. But 100 years ago, the revolutions were coming practically every year. Quantum mechanics, relativity, lots of things in physics mostly, also chemistry. And we know about these. We just look back in history and we know them, but almost so little has been happening in the way of fundamental scientific revolutions that change our understanding and change the nature of our lives. And I think it has to do with the system of doing science, that the way it's set up right now, it's institutionalized. And because you have institutions, you need to develop systems. So if, for example, if you apply to a granting agency and you say, well, most of the world thinks that the earth is flat, but I've got evidence that the earth is round. I've seen some satellite photos, looks round to me. And I traveled from South Africa. You know, I went to London, and then I went to Washington, D.C., and then to Seattle, Washington, and then Tokyo. And I worked my way back. I went all around, and I was looking for the edge of the flat earth, and I could never see it. I looked out the window, and never did I see an edge. And so I think the earth actually might be round based on the preliminary evidence that I have, and I'm applying for some money because this needs to be studied some more because it's really important. So it goes to the granting agency. I don't know what exists in South Africa, but probably something similar to what we have. And the gatekeeper takes your application, and he said, well, yeah, James has a pretty interesting idea here. But who are the people? Pretty interesting idea. We have to get the world's experts on the shape of the earth to judge, to see whether this guy's a lunatic or it makes sense. So the gatekeeper recruits the experts, but who are the experts? They're the flat earth people. And obviously, like most of us, we don't like to be displaced from our exalted positions. So the last thing that we want is for you to get money to pursue your radical idea, because if it turns out that you're right, it means we're wrong. And we wasted our career thinking about details of the flat earth. And so you won't get your money. And most scientists know this. they wouldn't dare to put in a radical idea for funding because they know what's going to happen to it. It won't get funded, and they'll get a reputation being a revolutionary and a troublemaker, right? We don't want troublemakers. So science has become conservative.
You stop talking about me because,
well, not you. You're the opposite. I know that. That's pretty obvious. But I apologize for using you as the example. But you know what I'm talking about.
I was joking. I'm normally called in my academia or university. I'll be sort of described as a troublemaker, but yet I keep pushing through and get an award afterwards for something different. But it's just quite funny, the descriptive story of how you're saying of how these revolutionary scientists, much like yourself, try to get through these processes, but it's very difficult for them to actually maintain a high level academic career like you have done yourself and have the leeway and flexibility to create such a creative lab like you've done for your students.
Well, thank you for the accolades. I don't know, somehow I've been fortunate. I used to think that I was the only scientist in history to have evaded the response of the establishment, because my lab has been reasonably funded over the years, but let me say that that I have not escaped. I've encountered quite a few difficulties locally, especially, but I've been able to overcome. We're in okay shape, but almost every revolutionary scientist suffers in one way or another. They're just not, among universities and institutions, they're not valued because, they often threaten the flow of income into those institutions. Oh, you've got that crazy guy at your institution who's challenging everything we know and challenging the organizations that bring money to our organization. They're not enthusiastic about that.
Meanwhile, the mandate of a scientist is to challenge existing knowledge.
You know that.
Yeah.
I know that. But the reality is that if you're in that category, you don't thrive. It takes a kind of dogged determinism for someone to survive in an organization like that. It's problematic for the young people because the situation has gotten worse instead of better, and that's why we've created this institute. If there are some of your listeners who have done well and want to do something constructive for the world, I encourage them to contact me. Lots of opportunity and some really interesting projects that we've reviewed extensively and very carefully that have the potential to turn the world upside down. Very exciting. And we need some donors to help us to fund some of these ideas. So I didn't want to leave without talking about our Institute for Venture Science, because I'm so excited about what this can do for science of the future. ivscience.org.
No, we'll definitely have all of those in the show notes and with the fuller elaboration, because I agree that the different programs you put together really do have a profound impact and opportunity for many researchers out there that do face these kind of difficulties. And I guess, there's also that double-edged sword with your philosophy of things must be simpler, like even your water filtration system. When one looks at a picture of it, it looks too simple. And people go, no, that can't be right. Why would we want to spend money on that? It seems too much. And even, I understand you've been working more and more on a desalination solution. I don't know how far that's progressed, but how's that coming along?
Well, I mean, we put together a company to try to overcome technical obstacles to filtration and desalination. We've made great progress. We've reached the point where where we can do it, but we're not able to do it as consistently as we like. It takes more investment to get it to the point where it should work. And it's so exciting because these systems are indeed so simple. It's just based on the exclusion zone principle, because the exclusion zone excludes, well, not everything, but pretty much everything. And so it should exclude all kinds of bacteria, carcinogens, poisons, and salt, you name it. And we need some more investment to bring it to the stage where it really will work. And you can do desalination. You can do it by reverse osmosis, and many people do it that way, rely on that process. But the process is so costly in terms of energy to desalinate. I had a visit to Saudi Arabia 6 or 7 years ago, and I learned in a visit there that essentially they have no water sources. They get their water almost completely from the ocean, and they have desalination plants. Of course, they've got lots of energy, cheap energy over there. In fact, a gallon of gas is cheaper than a gallon of water. So they do the desalination, and for them it's not a big deal, although it is a security threat for them, because if someone takes out their desalination plants, they're dead. they need that water. So being able to do it, as at least in theory, as we can do it without any input of energy, it's the infrared energy that builds the exclusion zones, that excludes the substances, including apparently salt. That's one of the reasons why we're so enthusiastic about forging ahead with that. We definitely need more investment to bring it to fruition, but the prospect is so exciting, because being able to take ocean water and get drinking water out of that using no energy besides the environment, coming from the environment, is very exciting. So we're working on it. Good point.
Maybe we should get some sales reps to go to Saudi Arabia again for you and do some punting, marketing.
Sure, totally. You're not so far from there. You're closer than we are.
No, I was thinking with the show, I've got some people. I'll send them some tales. Put out some feeders out there. What can be done. So we'll keep in contact, and you let me know the sort of numbers you're looking at, and let's see what we can do to try help you out there. I know some of our listeners as well quite well connected, so we'll see what we can do to help you out on building that further. Because I don't know if you've seen the news over the last year, but we're having a massive water crisis here in South Africa, particularly in Cape Town.
I know.
Where they've now started building these desalination plants, and lots of wasted funds and billions of rand, so a couple of $100 million. So it's possible to actually divert some funds into that, and some military research into that.
That would be great. I have heard about the crisis. And what happened? Are you in Cape Town or in Johannesburg?
I'm in Cape Town, yes.
So what's the current situation?
Well, we had some rains, and sort of there's a sort of restriction that you have about 50 liters of water a day that you can utilize. Not many people respect that. And now there's sort of the source of water is from the deep aquifers, some dam water, and then desalination water mixing with it. So that's what our current water is at the moment. But it works as a good economic model for them, because they got to increase the price of water by 10 to 20 times.
10 or 20 times? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, they make quite a bit of money from that whole process. But yeah, it works pretty well for that. So I guess, again, the science aspect of it, with your solution being so simple, is that this seems like pseudoscience, not possible. And then, but at the same time, with it being effective, actually working, like you're saying it in the mixed results, is that the ones that have invested money in terms of these desalination plants are going to lose their contracts, because your solution is a lot more cost effective. But there's ways of doing it, and that's sort of what my specialization is. That's what my other research. So let's see what we can do.
Okay, thank you. That'd be great. Sure.
But but I understand that, you said that our time is up for now in terms of the timeline, unless you're able to share more, but I'm sure we're going to definitely have you on the show again.
Okay, well, it's been really fun, James, and thank you for all the interesting questions.
I had a lot more, but unfortunately, you did tell me there was a time limit of 90 minutes. I will respect it. I know you're very busy and you have all your students.
Thank you.
Since you are a dad to all of them.
Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Okay, take care, and good luck with the local water issue. Wish you the best. Thank you. Okay, take care. Okay.
For more, visit www.nicheradio.co.za.